So the last thing we want to talk about is responsive and cross-platform design. Obviously, users are interacting with programs from lots of different devices these days. So we definitely want to take those things into account. Responsive design has to do with the size of your interface and how it's going to appear on different screens. Cross-platform designs actually has to do with the interactivity, especially, and how that functions differently on different types of devices. When we're talking responsive design, we want to try to accomplish that with CSS. It used to be that you would create web content as there started to be different devices of different sizes. People had, say, two different versions of their website, one for mobile, one for regular computers. And then that meant having to maintain content in two different places. Not ideal. So CSS evolved until the kind of tools that we have in CSS3, where you can actually use different CSS elements to create designs that respond to different sizes that are detected. So we're going to talk in particular about the @media element and how we can use that to create some responsiveness in the look of our GUI and in the way it displays on different sized windows. The other thing we want to think about is cross-platform compatibility. And cross-platform compatibility can be a little bit tricky because it has to do with the actual interaction. I'm not demanding that you make your things universally usable, but I am asking that you be able to detect what kind of platform a user is using and to give them information if they're using one that is not where your program does not function. So I'd like your program to function on at least 2 out of 3 of the following: a mobile device like a phone, touch screen, and a computer that has, like a full keyboard and mouse. Okay, so at least 2 out of 3 of those your program should function on. And you should be able to detect all 3 different types and give users a message if they're on one that doesn't work for your program. So what you want to do in order to evaluate this is first test your program on different platforms, then find solutions for the cross-platform interactivity that you're trying to create, and then create code that tests for different platforms and has some kind of response. So those are the 3 tasks that you need to do. Okay, so let's go back to our example program. And I've pulled up an old version here just to remind you of how this was looking at an earlier stage in the coding. So right now it's using a 90% width on the screen. And so that's good in that it responds to different screen sizes. Now, as I was coding, it occurred to me that this actually does affect the gameplay. The width does affect the gameplay because, if you've got this larger area to defend, that's actually a little bit harder and adds kind of an extra variable. I also, I don't think it looks as good when it's, high, got this really, really wide horizontal, just style-wise. I didn't like that as well. And, as I was coding and putting it into inspector view, I actually liked it better on this smaller, more constrained size. So I decided that I wanted it to have this kind of a dimension rather than the 90% just all the time. So what that meant was I would have to detect when the window was larger and scale down the width of the game area. How can you do that? That you can basically accomplish in your CSS. So this is the final version of the CSS, and I typically put my my dynamic @media code at the very bottom of my CSS, just so that it's the overriding thing, right? Because remember, CSS compiles from top to bottom, and if it encounters things whatever it encounters later on is going to overwrite. So if you create a style for the same element that you put later on down in the CSS file, that's going to be the overriding one. So I always put my dynamic code at the very bottom. So that's the overriding thing that's going to happen. Basically what I'm saying here is if the screen is greater than, right, so minimum width 900, if it's greater than 900 pixels, then the play width is going to be fixed at 800, right? So, and that works okay. We know that it'll fit in the screen because it's saying like you have to have a screen width of at least 900 or higher. Then I'm setting it at 800. Otherwise, it's going to do the thing that it's coded as, which is the 90% screen width. Okay, so it'll use the adaptive 90% unless you're on a very wide screen. In that case, it's going to use the fixed width of 800. And again, I'm not worried bleeding off the edges with that discrete width because I know I'm saying it's got to be at least a 900 pixel screen. Okay, now the other thing is the height. So I am, using, I'm modifying the height for smaller screens. So if the screen is 750 or less, then I'm actually shrinking down the heights of the instruction area, the game area, the sky container, city container, and the horizon and dead block containers. So I'm doing that with the height as well. So just using the CSS creates a responsive design. And then here's the final version. And you can really see it on the width here that I have a wider screen. So it's capping it off at 800 pixels. And so now I'm going to get a more consistent gameplay experience. Now, the other issue, and I'm going to go ahead and reload the game so you can see. So the other issue here, once I started to do my testing, in the old version of Draggable, it works just fine on a touch screen. I've been using Draggable for a while in another program that I use for a different class, and I've never had a problem with it on touch screens. So I was, merrily going along using Draggable and thinking, oh, that's going to be just fine for my touch screen. Well, as it turns out, and here, hopefully you can see the little touches turning up on the screen, it actually does not work with touch screens. So that, again, required some more thought and design because you want this to work on a touch screen like an iPad, that sort of thing. Phone is going to be too small, so I'm actually going to give the user a little error message if they try to access it on the phone because it's this interface with all the city blocks and whatever, like you can't possibly touch the screen on a small enough spot for it to be usefully working. But an iPad, you should definitely be able to use a touch screen functionality to operate the ship on that, especially because you don't have a mouse to click and drag, all that stuff. So I definitely had to do some more work to get this to work properly on touch screens. So what did I have to do? A couple of things. I had to do some research and find a code library that would give me some commands, some methods that I could use with touch screens in JavaScript and actually, technically speaking, in jQuery. So here's my final HTML. And notice I have an additional link to a CDN source for something called, for a library called jQuery touch events. Okay, so this is one that I found that worked. There's a link to it on our course website. And that basically is going to enable me to use some different methods. And then, honestly, it took me more time to research and find a library that worked. Once I found that, it really wasn't hard to adapt my code. So here in the final code, I had to add into my continuously active functions, one for touch area, and the touch area is basically the class for where the user can actually touch, and it'll function, right? So on tap, and this is the new thing that library gave me. I'm going to create a function on the fly, an anonymous function. It's going to have it's going to collect the E for event, and that is a special vocabulary, the E variable. And then the E variable event, again, that's just the thing that triggered the event. So in this case, it's going to be the touch. So it's going to say, what is the X position of the place you touched on the screen? And it's going to set that, it's going to grab that from the page X property of the event, which is, again, a built-in property. And then it's going to get the location of the ship. And then it's going to figure out the X position, that is where you touched your finger, versus the left position of the ship, like what the distance is between those two things. Then I had to create a little offset, which is just the width of the ship divided by 2. So I need a half width of the ship as an offset so that, you're not going to put the ship, you want to put the center of the ship where the person touched. You don't want the left edge of the ship where the person touched, right? And then this moveX variable is just going to equal moveX, which is the distance between where you touched and the left position of the ship, minus the offset because you want it to go a little bit further left, okay? And then if move X is less than 0, we're going to use a minus equal to move the ship to the left. And then we have to turn move X into a positive value. Otherwise, all we have to do, if it's to the right, if it's greater than 0, that means we want to move it to the right. That's easy. We just use plus X, okay? Then our move X code is going to just be operate X plus, and that's this operator, whether it's a plus or a minus, move X, which is the distance, the numerical distance, and then PX. And then we're just going to set the left position. We're going to set through CSS, we're going to set the left position of our defend ship to this move X, which is this little bit of code. So it's not hard. It, again, required a little bit of thinking through of the logic, but as long as I could collect the position of where the user's tapping, I could calculate how to use that to be the position of the ship. So let me show you then how this actually works on a touch screen. Basically, where I'm touching, it's going to move the ship to that location. So it's a little bit different functionality. It's not the drag functionality, but actually this is better. I tried the drag functionality, but I just couldn't move it fast enough on the touch screen. Like there was a lag. So this is actually a quicker way to move the ship. I actually also did change the speeds a little bit of what is easy and normal and hard. And I ratcheted it down. So as soon as the user starts to use the touch screen rather than a mouse to move it, it actually changes what the positions are or what the millisecond values are for hard and medium and fast and all that good stuff. So anyway, now it works with a touch screen. So that makes me happy. So now it'll work on an iPad, it'll work on a computer with a mouse or with a trackpad. If the user accesses with a phone, they're going to get a message to say, like, don't. Now, the way that I did that, just up in my body in the HTML, notice now there's this on load, and it does a phone check, and it sends the document URL. The reason I'm going to send the URL of the document along, into this function is because, remember, we've got 2 pages. We've got the game intro and the straight, like the actual GUI. The game intro does the same check for whether you're using a phone to tell you just right up front, hey, this isn't going to work for you. Just in case the user somehow got directly to the GUI screen, I wanted to be able to run that same check, but I have to do different things to deactivate, whether it's on the GUI page that has like game area or the game intro page that has instruction area. So that, I have to write the message to different places depending on where you're accessing. So in the JavaScript code, that little function called phone check is just super easy. It's basically taking the which page, the information, that URL, it's going to search that string. And if it's the game intro, then it's going to set the target equal to instruction area. If it's invaders, which is the name of the main GUI page, then it's going to set that equal to game area. So it's basically setting the jQuery target based on which page it's coming from. And again, I'm just using the built-in search, string search method that just comes as part of JavaScript. So nothing difficult there. And then just this little line of code that I found online. This is a little snippet that I adapted from another person who posted it to a message board. So it's just a way to check for whether or not you're using a mobile device that is not an iPad or a tablet. Okay, because iPads and tablets work fine. It's just if it's a phone. So basically I'm saying if it's mobile, and then except for iPads and tablets, so eliminating all those, that means it's a phone. Then it's just going to give you this little message, sorry, you need a larger screen to fend off this attack, visit again from a tablet or a computer. And notice I used HTML, so I can do this as a H2 and a paragraph. And then I'm going to hide that start button so that they can't get any further to the next page. So that's all it's going to do. And I wanted to be able to show you how to check for different devices. And you can adapt this code to figure out, how to check for devices based on your needs. So that's just an example of some responsive coding and how to take into account cross-platform design in your application. As I said, you want to design for at least 2 out of 3 of the typical devices that people use these days. And I think that the code examples here should help you to do that.